If you take a look back at American history, a rather interesting ideology consistently arises and tends to stay around. This would be the concept of American exceptionalism. What is American exceptionalism? Well, it proposes that the United States, for one reason or another, is the greatest nation on Earth. Now, everybody has their own viewpoint, and no, I won't divulge mine, but I think it's important to see why this arose and why it stayed around. Obviously, this country had a rather interesting origin story. You had settlers leaving a well-developed Europe to fend for themselves in a new world. A new society could be created here, abandoning the preconceptions of European life. With that, many believe this new society could be inherently better. This concept can be easily summed up with a few words from John Winthrop in 1630. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. So that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. Basically, he's saying that this new society must strive to be utopian, or at least the best in the world. And if they fail, well, I guess they become the joke of the world. Of course, he also mentions God. It is expected that the creation of this city upon a hill is integral to God's plan, and failure to fully realize it will come with some pretty harsh consequences. This link between God and the new society is important, and will pop up much more often as we go on. Anyway, these settlers create colonies, and over time become part of the British rule, somewhat ironically. The Brits begin to govern these successful colonies and animosity arises, revolution. It's assumed that all the benefits of British rule are abandoned, self-reliance is necessary. Of course, we see the revolution succeed, and these United States form into a federal government. Within the construct of this government is a couple core ideals, albeit a bit unrealized. A larger political conversation and influenced by a more sizable group of people than seen in Europe. Freedom, again, a bit hypocritically, and a notion of self-reliance. This intends to reach closer to the city upon a hill ideal, but obviously it doesn't do the best job. As time goes on, we see new leaders and new ideas. The presidency of Thomas Jefferson really kicks off quite a lot, in fact. He conceived an agrarian, that's farming, utopia, wherein every white man owned a plot of land and a farm. The self-reliance needed for farming would influence moral actions and teach basic skills, and we would all just be happy. Contributing to this was an embargo act making overseas trades illegal. Yeah, you'd have to be pretty self-reliant after that, but since Europe still provided necessary goods, Americans just had to figure out how to do it themselves. Ironically, this would just speed up American industrialization, certainly against Jefferson's agrarian ideals. You silly man, you. And self-reliance remained as important as ever. There was discussion whether infrastructure should even be assisted by the federal government. Imagine if every bridge was built by Jimmy's Construction LLC. But this wasn't much of an option. You have the Louisiana Purchase massively expand the size of the nation, and settlers want a piece of this rather massive pie. Of course, they would have to be, say it with me now, self-reliant. On the frontier, there is no government regulation on how to defend yourself from bears. At the same time, we see the concept of manifest destiny, that expansion across the continent is God's will for this American experiment. Of course, this is a pretty big example of how American exceptionalism stayed consistent throughout the 19th century. But with this expansion of land saw the expansion of American territories, and those territories wanted to become states. But getting those new states would prove a bit controversial. Why? Well, if a state allowed the practice of slavery, those slaves would count as 3/5 a person. This affects a lot of things, and would mean that slave states would gain massive influence in federal law. The solution to this was to make a compromise, a Missouri Compromise. This was seen as a bit of an attack on the practice of slavery to many Southerners, and would begin to promote fears of losing their economic backbone. Slaves had a profound effect on the Southern economy, it is after all free labor, and fears would begin to grow that one day slavery may be banned outright. Now, what does this have to do with American exceptionalism? I'm getting to that, just give me a bit. On a federal level, the issue of slavery wasn't a moral one. The issue wasn't often about whether owning people was wrong, but more so whether the expansion of slavery was creating a political machine. This machine, of course, focusing on promoting only the ideals of the plantation owner. So in 1860, a Northern Republican wins, Abraham Lincoln. Chaos ensues. Fearing this new leader would impose bans on slavery, Southern states leave the Union. This is a pretty big mess here. As the Union divides, it becomes apparent the American experiment may not succeed after all. The city upon a hill dream will never have a chance. For the North, this is not an option. To reconcile this, war is declared. So obviously the South doesn't quite believe in American exceptionalism at this point, feeling they were wronged in that the experiment has failed. New Southern pride replaces American pride, but lacking the same basis of that utopian ideal. Of course, the South loses. The Union is restored, and American pride, at least in the North, surges. At what was the darkest moments in American history, the Union showed its capacity to keep the experiment continuing. Also, the issue of America's hypocrisy of freedom is cleared up a bit, since we don't enslave people anymore. This wasn't the only incident of American exceptionalism in the 19th century. Over the course of the 1800s, there was a rise in anti-immigration sentiment, anti-Catholics, you get the point. For some, the purpose of American exceptionalism was limited to a select group within the nation rather than the nation itself. A bit contradictory to the nation's initial purpose? Well, yeah. Anyway, we would see the concept of American exceptionalism reach new levels with the Spanish-American War. We won, and we got the Philippines. But those Filipinos didn't want our American rule. So back to war. That was a bit of a messed up phase. But regardless, America had grown, and quite a lot. It was ready to spread its exceptionalism. But bigger problems were arising over the pond. A war. And what a war it was. As World War I heated up, America had to pick sides. While the country didn't send soldiers over to fight until late into the war, we were sending supplies and good-natured feelings to our British comrades. But anti-German resentment rose up in the States, which was unfortunate considering a good percentage of the nation had rather recently immigrated there. So in the quest to be American, these German immigrants effectively abandoned old traditions and cultures and whatnot. We picked a winning side. While Europe was a bit down in the dumps, America was feeling good about its new position on a global stage, fighting a war without seeing direct harm to the homeland, and winning. After this, the USA went into a period of isolationism. American self-reliance was important in this post-war world. Domestically, though, things seemed to be looking up. Better industrialization and treatment of workers saw general improvements to quality of life. Better pay, less lethal work, and more leisure time. With this, we see the advent of consumerism. Consumerism promoted the idea that products will improve our lives. American exceptionalism allowed the flow of capitalism to achieve great things, like refrigerators. Many saw it as the natural progression of the Republic, leading to these new accommodations and more free time. We have baseball now. Have a hot dog. Wow. But the Republic wasn't all perfect. No, not by any means. The ban of alcohol sent the country into, let's call it, rebellion. Not against the state, but more so the rules. Prohibition was seen as anti-freedom, and therefore anti-American. And everybody drank. Of course, the economy collapsed. Great Depression. Good old Roosevelt was there, though, to lend a helping hand. We're all in this together, and whatnot. But economic tragedy isn't the best catalyst for national pride. That would be war. And that's what we got. And we win again. Obviously, national pride soars, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Europe is left in ruins, and America is, to be honest, objectively the most well-off nation by this time. After all, it's not destroyed by war. Industry is booming, we don't have to deal with cleaning up exploded buildings. It really is quite a good time. But not all is well. A challenger is approaching, the Soviets. They don't think like us. We like freedom, they like order. We like to make our money with the prospects of the American dream. They got communism. Well, at least we got the A-bomb. Oh man. And the Cold War starts. American exceptionalism may as well be law. We are better than them. They want to destroy our way of life, and feasibly could do so. Life is so good right now, and the only legitimate threat is these commies. But this coincides with something else. The 1950s were truly a special decade, and not just from a nostalgic point of view. We saw massive developments in standards of living. The suburb, the desired home of the middle class, quintessential Americana, Coca-Cola, cars, rock and/or roll. And again, consumerism. Now, the 1950s aren't ancient history. It really wasn't long ago at all. So these viewpoints and sentiments sort of trickled down over time. The ebb and flow of natural culture and generation saw a resurgence of American exceptionalism in the 1980s. Surely we still had a big threat across the globe, and our economy was absolutely wonderful. Of course, exceptionalism viewpoint grows. Now, the final surge in American exceptionalism comes after the events of 9/11. By this point, what is considered American is a far different perception than that of the early 1900s. Rather than an ethnic basis, it becomes more mainstream to see it as appreciation for American core values, the concepts the Founding Fathers strived for and obviously didn't quite achieve at the time. It's here American exceptionalism is more warranted by the achievements of the American experiment, the enhancements in quality of life, and the quest for freedom. Now, when you get to the modern day, it's a bit sticky, and since I'm not going to talk about any, modern political things, I'll just see if I can answer the originally posed question. Do Americans think that they are better than everybody else? Now, it's kind of a stupid question. It generalizes a mindset across an entire nation of people, but if we are in the practice of generalizing, I would say this. The foundation of the country itself is based upon some level of perceived exceptionalism, breaking course from the norm in an attempt to create a better society. That mindset is carried on and distorted over this more than 200-year span, which isn't surprising. To some, the concept of American exceptionalism denotes difference from its other Western nations rather than inherent better quality. But to some it doesn't. I think it's safe to argue most citizens of a nation see the values ingrained of their nation as, well, better than the rest. It's how we're raised. You don't see too many Brits cheering for Germany during the World Cup. It's just human nature to see our society as right, and the differences in others as wrong. But what do I know? This is Tyler of Knowledge Hub.